Okay, now we'll get into the presentation. As always, we'll do a general EOC update. You'll also be hearing a special presentation on the county enforcement ordinance that was recently put forward by the county. We'll provide an update on our census outreach. We'll also provide an update on domestic violence, and finally, an update on childcare and school day supervision update. And so at this point, I'll ask Lee to kick it off.
Thank you, Dave. And on behalf of Kip Harkness and I'll be leading our presentation today. As Dave mentioned, we do have a rather full presentation for you today. I know we teased, I think, 2 items last week, but additional items came forward that the team wanted to include the council in on those discussions. So we will be doing a general EOC update, the county enforcement ordinance, as well as census, domestic violence, and beginning that conversation with childcare and school day supervision. Before we get started on that, however, I do want to just update the council with the actions this past weekend. As late Friday night, we were notified, not by PG&E, but by the California Independent System Operator, that they had ordered PG&E to start possible rolling power outage due to the severe weather. And so a lot of us in the EOC jumped on Zoom on Friday night and began walking through and planning for the weekend and the next few days around operational changes for the city. This included kind of augmenting and looking at backup generation for any of our cooling facilities that were already in the works due to the temperature increase this past weekend, as well as looking at our temporary homeless shelters that we had stood up at Camden and other sites to ensure that they had backup generation in case power was lost. And in the case of Camden, we did need to move that cooling center to Willow Glen, but we were able to bring in backup generation for the actual family assistance center there. And then we also planned between the police department and our Department of Transportation around traffic safety measures if there were large rolling blackouts. So very similar to PSPS, where we had that coordinated traffic measures in place. However, we did not know the time and locations of any of these possible locations, but we did go into the planning stages of potential blackouts. More importantly, we had a pretty robust operation over the weekend in our EPIO branch in multi-languages, both on social media and a web presence in English, Spanish, Vietnamese, and Chinese. Around anything that we were hearing directly from Cal ISO, as well as PG&E, as well as contact information for PG&E if anyone was experiencing power outages unrelated to the rolling blackouts. In addition, we also activated our AFN network, or Access and Functional Need Network, as well as elderly advocates on the information we had so that they could outreach to those networks. And altogether, that network is just shy of 36 nonprofits. In the end, San Jose did not experience any rolling blackout. However, we did see pretty significant power outages to parts of our city due to failing equipment over the weekend and as well as yesterday. The city has continued to communicate via social media and through a web presence, the contact information for PG&E, as well as the reporting tools that PG&E has said. And we've also shared on the public portal for PG&E the affected area maps with our AFN network to ensure that they can do any specific or targeted outreach to the areas still experiencing power outage due to the equipment failure. Per the California Independent System Operator, system conditions are stable now, and they do not anticipate any further emergencies in the next few days as the heat storm has moved out and the temperatures have decreased. We will be continuing to push PG&E to share any additional info or information that they have with the affected residents, as well as the city. And Lori Mitchell is on for any questions at the end. And then lastly, we did have a few fires because of the electrical storm that moved through, and fire was on top of those. We do have the city covered with overtime and additional engines at different stations as we have received the call for mutual aid for a number of fires that the chief is also in attendance and can go over at the end. So we'll move to now our COVID emergency operations update. And today we're going to have Andrew Eric, who is an assistant to the city manager in the Office of Civic Innovation, but has been activated since the second week of February in the Emergency Operations Center, serving as assistant to the EOC director. Serving in a variety of logistical kind of complex roles, strategy, as well as big data needs that we have. So with that, I will hand it over to Andrew for the update.
Thanks, Lee. Appreciate the intro. Good morning, Mayor, council members, and members of the public. I'm pleased to be with you here this morning and to provide this week's EOC update. As of yesterday, August 17th, there were 340 city staff in the EOC. This is compared to 342 last week and 390 2 weeks ago. And we continue to work nimbly and flexibly to slow and reduce the spread of COVID-19 and support our most at-risk people. Last week, here are some of the highlights of what we accomplished. We continued coordination of food and necessities distribution with no reported gaps. The city and its community partners delivered more than 2.3 million meals across the county. Also, thanks to Council's ratification of the al-fresco orders last week, we are moving quickly to support that program, including several urgent requests to create new streets and spaces for restaurants to operate in. We also redesigned the webpage and supported several TV interviews to publicize that program. In addition to publicizing the heat and power outages that Lee just spoke about, our EPIO also amplified county messaging around testing centers, census response, and various social media outreach. And you'll be hearing more about, in particular, the census outreach efforts later in this presentation. Our Community and Economic Recovery branch held 2 community leader forums on August 12th, and also launched a solicitation for the Community Development Block Grant Micro Enterprise Grant Program. You'll be hearing from them as well as another item on today's agenda. Our safety branch has completed trainings for approximately 300 department managers around the city on COVID-19 safety protocols and how to deal with COVID cases and exposures. We're also pleased to report that the city did receive 50% of our FEMA reimbursement request for personal protective equipment, which reimburses the city $2 million for funding we have spent to provide PPE to our essential workers and make sure that we can continue essential city services while keeping our city staff safe. And finally, we closely tracked the passage of the county's urgency ordinance last week, providing for enforcement of the public health order. And for more on that, I will pass it on to my colleagues, Oscar Carrillo and Cameron Day. Thanks very much.
Good morning, Mayor, council members. Thank you, Andrew. My name is Oscar Carrillo. I am the EOC Compliance Branch Director. Alongside me virtually is Cameron Day, the EOC Legal Advisor. We'd like to take this opportunity to provide an update on the recently passed County Enforcement Ordinance. Next slide, please. Last Tuesday, the Santa Clara County Board of Supervisors adopted an ordinance which provides a framework for addressing violations of their health order and authorizes administrative fines for violations of the health order. Prior to the ordinance, violations of the health order were considered criminal violations and prosecuted as misdemeanor offenses. The new ordinance allows the county to pursue civil penalties, which the county believes are more flexible and less punitive than misdemeanor offenses. Under the new ordinance, any person, corporation, business owner, or property owner is subject to a citation for violations of the health order. And the penalties for violations can range from between $25 to $500 for non-commercial violations to $250 to $5,000 for violations involving commercial activities. To clarify, non-commercial violations are those that do not involve a business or business transactions, and vice versa. Commercial violations do involve a business or business transaction. What does this mean? Well, before Cameron talks about how the ordinance will impact the city of San Jose, I'd like to explain how the current enforcement process works. Next slide, please. Right now, the County District Attorney's Office is the one that is handling all of the complaints regarding the county health order. Generally, they receive the complaint via email or through their online reporting tool. Their office currently has 4 investigators that work those complaints, and they conduct all the outreach and education. Since shelter in place, they have received about 10,000 complaints, and they have reported out a very high rate of compliance. The district attorney's office may also refer the complaint to a specific county department for follow-up. For instance, workplace safety complaints may be referred to their Office of Labor Standards Enforcement, and complaints regarding restaurants may be sent to their Department of Environmental Health and Food Safety Inspectors. If they're unable to make contact, they will refer the complaint to the local jurisdiction. In our case, it's the City of San Jose Police Department. These are generally non-compliant businesses which they refer to us. If San Jose Police confirms a violation, they will document it, write a report, and send it to the district attorney's office for further action. From reports that I've seen, there have been fewer than 50 citations issued throughout the county, and none have thus far led to criminal charges. Just for reference sake, the district attorney's office referred a total of 10 complaints to the San Jose Police Department last week. They run the gamut from barbershops to restaurants that are not in compliance. I'll now turn it over to Cameron to speak about the potential impacts that the ordinance may have on the city of San Jose. Thank you.
Thank you, Oscar. Next slide, please. So as you may be aware, the County of Santa Clara did pass the ordinance aimed at allowing them to have more enforcement capabilities within the county. That passed last Tuesday. In a brief read of that from the CAO's office, it may appear that it seems to be focused on the county itself. However, they do intend, in following up with county staff, they do intend to designate other enforcement officers outside of the county that would then be able to enforce those orders. How that affects both the city of San Jose and other local jurisdictions would be if and when the time comes that the county does decide to designate an officer, let's say the chief of police or the city manager of the city of San Jose, then the city of San Jose could basically pick up that mantle and start enforcing the county orders. So that's basically the process that they've outlined in the ordinance. However, I don't believe as of yesterday, the county has made any designees outside of the county yet. And staff will continue to work with them to understand whom should be designated, the manners of doing so, and kind of the wherewithal for those abilities and the staff to pick up that mantle. Generally speaking, it's up to the city if we want to accept that delegation of authority. It's not mandatory that the city of San Jose start enforcing it. It is optional. And in order to do so, I think that the city would need to take an affirmative step publicly and make a formal acceptance of that. And that doesn't require us to spend a certain amount of time, energy, effort, or money or staff time enforcing it. That will just allow us to do so as we choose or are directed by council. Some of the concerns that CAO has about this would be generally when we take on the mantle of enforcement, and we haven't yet, but if we would choose to do that, there might be some additional liability, or there will be additional liability in that, both in the discriminatory enforcement aspects of it to make sure that we're not single out certain businesses or certain areas, legality of health laws, the appellate process, and things like that. These are all issues that the county is aware of, staff is aware of, and my understanding is we'll continue to work with Santa Clara County staff to work through those issues and make sure we have a nice plan and procedure in place before anything happens. Like I said before, the next steps, one is I don't believe the county has actually reached out and named anyone to designate. If and when they do that, that would be something that the staff needs to prepare, analyze, and figure out exactly what resources would be available. I'll leave that to Lee and CMO and EOC staff to figure those parts out. But the bottom line is once that recommendation would come back, we would need to go back to council and ask for any kind of approvals and take that forward based on direction from council to staff. Lastly is that the enforcement is, I want to make sure that it's very clear. The enforcement isn't just simply go out and giving money. It is a very long process akin to what we have now, is my understanding. It really truly is educational and communicative in nature. The goal is compliance. The goal isn't to raise up fines. And my understanding is that those exact same procedures that have been in place will continue to do so. It's simply that at the end of that line, it's an easier way to write a citation to hopefully gain compliance for those who simply refuse to comply or refuse to listen to the communication. And with that, I'll go ahead and turn it back over to staff.
Thank you, Cameron. And I did want to state that the county is putting together a countywide working group made up of county staff as well as other cities in the county, and San Jose will be participating in that. Really, this effort is part of a much larger program, not just around enforcement of the public health ordinance, but also educating and a pretty robust communications program around compliance. And it's our understanding that the county will make available data for us to determine what type of communications and education and outreach that we really want to focus on, and where those sectors are. So as we continue that work with the county and we start that working group, the EOC will loop back with council and update accordingly through various updates on 3.1. Up next is our census outreach update with Kim Wallish and Jeff Fruster.
Yes, good morning, Mayor and Council. This is Jeff Fruster with the Office of Economic Development, and I'm here to provide an update on the 2020 census, our results to date, as well as present what the team and our partners will be primarily and intensely focused on these last 44 days of the census. The census does close on September 30th. And as we, if you don't mind going to the next slide, as we designed the census, we were very much focused on the hard to count populations that you see here in this slide. These are populations, again, that have over the last 3 or 4 censuses have been under reported in the census. So Santa Clara County is the 9th hardest to count county in the country. And so as we design this with our partners, and we work with about 80 to 100 community-based organizations, faith-based organizations, the county and others, to design strategies specifically to reach these populations. And though the census did not go live until March 12th of this year, we had been actually on the ground working with these partners to begin to make people aware of the census, the importance of the census, and really educating them in the various options that they would have in order to complete the census. Next slide, please. And all of you, I'm sure, are familiar with the many challenges that existed even prior to the pandemic. This was the first time the census had was available online. There were a lot of problems that the Census Bureau had in bringing that online. There, of course, is the digital divide issues that many of our populations face. The U.S. Census Bureau was about 50 to 60% in real terms of what it had been in 2010. That caused them significant problems in terms of staffing and their outreach and the technical assistance that they could provide. Language accessibility was a huge issue with this. Though the census was available online, it was also available in paper form as well, but that was only translated into Spanish. Other languages, it was not available in hard copy form. And of course, a huge issue had been a long legacy of historical mistrust with government that was only extremely escalated when the citizenship question was proposed back in June of 2019. And though that question is not on the census, I think its impact and really impacting these communities, hard to count communities, did leave a legacy. And so it's made it our job and people's interest in filling out the census that much less. Post-pandemic, there was, of course, the shelter in place. When shelter in place went into effect on March 17th, we had 30 community outreach events lined up for the next couple of weeks. All those were immediately canceled. So it really relied on the team led by Vilcia Rodriguez, Nguyen Pham. We also work closely with the Office of Immigrant Affairs and Zuma Maciel, Sabrina Garcia Parra, and Trevor Gold as well, and our communications office. And there were many other people involved. And they did all they could in terms of pivoting the strategy to rely on social messaging, on doing live community Facebook events, mailers, and the like. But really to reach the populations that we're talking about, that is by no means an effective way of doing so. And then there has been recently, as you know, the July 21st presidential executive order, which would seek to exclude undocumented individuals from the apportionment count from the census. We saw immediate impacts from our CBO partners telling us that any enumeration they were doing out in the field fell by 90% the day that that order came forward. Let's see. And then, of course, there was the sudden news that the Census Bureau, the administration, had shortened the census from October 31st in terms of the deadline to fill it out to September 30th. Next slide, please. So I'm not going to go through this, but you'll see everything that we have been doing. This has been outlined in various presentations and in info memos with council. Again, a lot of it prior to COVID was more face-to-face canvassing, community events. And since COVID and the shelter in place, it's been relied more on virtual means using technology and in part with phone banking as well. Next slide. So notwithstanding the challenges, at a very high level, the city is doing very well. We actually have the highest self-response rate of any of the top 10 cities. We're at 72%. And again, I give all the credit to the team and to our partners in being this. But with that said, we clearly want to recognize there are significant portions of our community census tracts where we have a significant undercount going. Next slide, please. And as you'll see here with this graph, you'll see kind of the response rates for different census tracts, which are about 211 in the city of San Jose, and how the response rates are going relative to the 2010 census response rate. So you'll see that that red portion is actually Alviso. Alviso had a significant problem as many people use post office boxes to receive their mail. There was a delay in the surveys going out, which caused them a delay in rolling out. But we are working closely with D4 and providing them with the information so that when they're out in the community, they can hopefully increase the outreach. There are also significant undercounts going on in East Side census tracts in D5, D7, and also in certain areas of D3, particularly around the San Jose State area. Next slide, please. So what are we going to do in these last 44 days? We hope to be on the ground in the communities rolling out the following 3 strategies. The first one is a knock and talk strategy, where we will be working with about 29 to 35 Parks and Rec staff that's under the direction of Mario Maciel, youth intervention people, Project Hope people, that we would provide training and have them targeted to these undercounted census tracts. I want to emphasize that we will be closely coordinating with the county as they are also conducting a canvassing and outreach effort in these communities. So we want to make sure that not only are we not knocking on the same door twice, but that we are coordinating those efforts and sharing data on a daily basis to measure the impact and make any mid-course corrections that would be required. We would also be potentially looking to provide funding through the Silicon Valley Community Foundation, perhaps to some of the other CBO partners that hopefully have the administrative capacity to bring on folks in these last few days to augment the number of people out in the neighborhoods. The second thing would be a phone banking effort, again, in coordination with the County of Santa Clara. We would be using the PDI data that they have. They have already been using this data. They are working with working partnerships. They've made about 155,000 calls to date. That's a county-wide number with about a 25 to 30% pickup rate. So again, we would be utilizing some of our remaining budget to have staff there to receive those calls and to provide the information and help people through completing the census. The third thing would be mobile kiosks, census kiosks. These would be at libraries, at community centers, at other places where people are gathering or having events, and being able to use iPads and have people fill out the census there. Want to emphasize we will obviously have strict safety protocols in place for all these outreach efforts, and again, be coordinating with the county. So again, that's kind of what we will be focused in on. Our goal is, again, to have the phone banking and the canvassing operations to begin to roll that out sometime next week. We are setting up trainings jointly with the county to get staff trained for this. And I want to thank all the council offices. We have been in constant contact with you, really going back 3 years on the census effort. You've been great in terms of getting the word out to your constituents, whether it's through newsletters or virtual events or community events when we were able to when you were able to host those. So I appreciate your time. That ends my presentation.
Thanks, Jeff. Up next, we have our domestic violence update, and I believe we have Assistant Chief Knopf and Deputy Chief Randall on the Zoom to start us off.
Thanks, Lee. We have an update today on domestic violence cases that we've received over COVID. I have today with me Deputy Chief Heather Randall and Lieutenant Rob Lang from our Family Violence Unit, who will give you a short update and be present for any questions.
Good afternoon, Deputy Chief Heather Randall, Bureau of Investigations, and I'm going to give a brief overview of this domestic-related report. This is a comparison of our shelter-in-place stats. We're looking at March 15 through June 27th, and we're comparing 2019 to 2020, and really trying to take a look at any effect the shelter-in-place had on domestic-related incidents. The crime types that we analyzed are listed in the report. They're on page 9. I'll briefly cover that. Some key considerations. This information is preliminary and it's subject to change pending UCR submission. And also when looking at small numbers that can have a big increase in percentages. What we found is that reported domestic-related incidents decreased during this time by 2%. We do know that domestic violence is an underreported crime, so we keep that in mind when analyzing this information. We do have some recommendations that we've taken out of this report. One of them is for outreach and intervention. We looked at locations where we had multiple reports of domestic-related incidents. And what we found was that one of the highest reported locations was an address that we were already working on. So we know that some of the systems we have in place do work. Our Family Violence Unit had already done outreach, working with advocates, working with DFCS on that particular address. So that's a good thing that we took out of this. And also potential for community outreach through our Crime Prevention Unit. Much like we did in 2019, we did some domestic violence seminars, and that there's potential for that, of course, once we come out of the shelter in place. We looked at reported incidents by division and district, looking for trends and increases in certain areas of the city. If you look at page 5 of the report, you'll see that it's broken down week to week. And we look at each division and each district within those divisions. Just to note that we did separate some of these stats. If you look at the far left, you'll see that there's a column prior to 2019, prior to 2020. They're relatively small numbers, but the reason that that is there is because while the incident may have been reported during that shelter in place, it actually occurred prior to that. So prior to that calendar year, the next column over would indicate that it happened prior to March. So we wanted to separate out those stats so that we can get a full picture of what's happening in that shelter in place. Again, when you look at all the stats, overall, we have a decrease of 2% in total for that shelter in place timeframe. We did on page 6, we have incident location type. And as we suspected, most of these are coming in from a residence or a home. We do see some decreases in that area. One area of note is the increase in hotel and motel reporting incident types.
Chief Randall, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I think, are you actually trying to display anything on the screen?
No, we don't have slides.
Okay,
So
all right.
This report to review prior to, I'm just giving an overview of what we.
Okay, got it. Sorry to interrupt. I just.
No problem. What we found is that most incident locations were at a residence or a home, as we suspected, with some slight increases in hotel or motel reporting location types. and likely due to placing people in hotels or motels as a result of shelter in place. We also are looking at the type of crime that is being reported. We have it listed out on page 9 of the report, shows all the different crime types.
Chief Randall?
Yes.
Chief Randall, this is Lee. Can you turn off your video to see if that clears up your audio? We're having some feedback problems.
Sure.
Thank you.
Try that. Okay, how is that?
No, we still have a problem with the audio. It was oddly when I interrupted you that it started it all. So I'm sorry about that, Chief.
Hearing me now?
No, not yet. Everything was fine up until then. I guess I screwed it all up.
Sometimes going out and coming back. I had this problem once during an office hour. Sometimes going out and coming back in will help.
So would it help if we maybe
If
interrupted for a moment and went to
Mayor.
another part of the presentation, then came
Yeah.
back to Chief Randall so she could log off and log back on?
Yeah, so Mayor, if I can suggest, we'll move along to the next subject.
Right.
And while Deputy Chief Randall logs back in, if I can request either Assistant Chief Knopf or Deputy Chief Randall to email the mayor and the council the info memo that you're referring to so that they have it in their email and can follow along, I'd appreciate it. Thank you. So moving along, we have the childcare and school day supervision update, and I'll hand it over to Jill Bourne and John Cicerelli, who are leading this.
Good morning, Mayor and Council. John and I will be giving you a brief review of the work that's been done today and then a little bit of a look ahead. So slide first, as a reminder, city staff worked closely with the county and our community partners to provide childcare to the children of emergency workers, first responders, and city staff who were doing essential work in the spring of this year. During that period, a total of 23 employee families utilized the city's program. There were 42 children served, and there were 94 days in which care was provided, with 42 city staff supporting the program in total. Slide. And then we transitioned to summer and Camp San Jose Strong, which was conducted using 24 community center, park, and library sites. There were a total of 890 children served, with 531 or 60% of them receiving a scholarship. 350 city staff supported this program. Now looking forward, we have 3 categories of care support and development. You can go to the next slide, please. First, there's support for early care providers in the form of grants funded through the coronavirus relief funds. This program is proposed to be administered by First 5 and the Santa Clara County Office of Education, and it is included for discussion in item 3.5 today. For children 0 to 5, Council is already aware of the proposed use of $1 million in CDBG funding for subsidies to income eligible families, providing 1 year of support for those impacted by COVID. In addition, city staff will also continue to provide referral for other city staff in need of care placement for their children. And our PRNS staff is working feverishly to relaunch the Recreation Preschool program with a target date of September 14th. This is late breaking news. And then with so many families dealing with the fact that schools are operating in distance learning mode, we've been working on ways to provide support to families in the form of school day supervision with technology access and support. So building on the city's successful R.O.C.K program, this program is being called R.O.C. and Learn. The approach we have taken so far is to coordinate with school districts to help ensure that low-income, high-needs students are referred successfully, to be able to coordinate other supports like meals and teacher communications. And then again, we'll continue to refer city staff into available care placement. Next. And then just for a little more context on the proposed R.O.C. and Learn program framework, we know that schools are legally prohibited from providing in-person instruction either on their own sites or at other sites. So this significantly limited their options. The goal of this approach is to utilize our own city resources and facilities to try to mitigate the costs of care or school support programs. Each location will be in stable cohorts of 12, following all safety guidelines. And students may be referred to the city by the schools or school districts, but we are also open to other options. Sessions are scheduled to begin on August 24th. So now turning it over to John, who's going to provide more detail.
Thanks, Jill. If we can move to the next slide. Good morning, Mayor and Council. So a little more detail. So Jill basically talked about 3 different programs that we're trying to support. One is preschool, and then we have 2 other programs, which are really what this slide is about. And this is the full day session. So this is up to 10 hours a day, 5 days a week, in those groups of 12 that Jill talked about, for 3-week periods of a time. And then our traditional R.O.C.K program, which is the after school program, which is typically only about 3 hours. And it includes homework help, but also a recreation and fun component that we mix in for kids. We cannot do any of this on school sites, so we'll be doing this at community centers and libraries and other places, which I'll show you in a minute. But first, I just wanted to walk you through what our capacity is initially. This is subject to change. One of the things we're trying to build into our model is some flexibility. You know, the school start has been a little rocky in some places and less rocky in others, but we know that there's probably adjustments to get through over the first weeks and days. So we want to be flexible to that. We want to be able to provide something that's the most useful and of most value to the schools and the kids that are in them. So in this case, we would be providing up to, lower right corner under total, up to 552 students could be served between those 2 programs. Again, this does not include preschool that we're trying to provide as well. As most of you know, the PRNS model is a fee-based model. So if we're not collecting fees, we're not able to pay staff because these are part-time unbenefited staff that go by the hour. And so the fees we charge help offset that. And at the bottom there, you can see if you're going to do the full 10-hour day session, a full 3-week session of 10 hours every day a week is $630. So divide that by 3, you get a weekly cost. If we apply the scholarship, which takes off 75% of the cost, that would cost someone $158 per child for 3 weeks, or a little over $50 a week per child. Same thing with our after school program with R.O.C.K. The normal cost is $189. Again, that's 5 days a week, but it's only 3 hours a day from 3 to 6. And if you apply this, so the full cost of that for 3 weeks is $189, gets you a scholarship price of $48, which is about $16 per week. Next slide, please. So here's most of the locations. I can tell you we've added another one, which is Bascom Community Center. As many of the council know, that's been a homeless shelter site for some time. That has ended. So we're right in the process of moving back in. And we're going to add a group there, a 10-hour day full session there, 1 cohort of 12. We're going to try to add at Bascom. So that's not reflected here, but a lot of the places you're used to, you've seen before, are on here. Some notables. Starboard, we're going to operate ourselves. In the past, that was vendor operated. Same thing with Alum Rock. I thought Alum Rock Youth Center was on here. Maybe it's not. I don't see it on here. I'll have to re-verify on that. But we're also in some locations that we wouldn't normally do this. So we are going to do some of this distance learning, for example, at the zoo or at Lininger Center, at Amberpruce Park, Almaden Lake. So that's not normal during the school year. So we're just trying to put as many locations. And you can see there's 11 different school districts that we'll be serving. And we're trying to match these locations as best we can geographically to those school district locations so that as easy as possible for families to get there and use them. Next slide, please. A little bit more on the framework. So as Jill talked about, the referral system is going to come through our agreements with the school districts and sort of what that will look like. But largely we're asking them to look at, well, kids, start with the kids that are on free lunch, and then you as the school, the schools know a lot more about these children than we would. and they have access to information we don't about them personally. So we think the school is actually a really relevant partner for referral, because they're going to be able to tell us, they don't even have to tell us, they're just going to be able to point out kids to us that need support because they're not getting that support in some way at home, or something's not working well and they need a little bit more hands-on. So we think that's the right way to do this. The schools are going to know the most about these kids. We're also going to coordinate school meals through the schools for the kids that qualify. But I'll say with this framework where we're doing a school referral system, we pretty much expect most, if not all, the kids to be on the school lunch program anyway. That's probably the well that they're drawing from. So probably in most cases, we're just providing lunch for pretty much all the kids in a class. And then as I mentioned earlier, exploring opportunities to expand or change the program as we need. This is going to be, our ability to be nimble and adjust to the school needs. And as we work this through over the next few weeks to figure out what's the best way to continue forward. And maybe we don't have to change much, and maybe we do. We'll just have to find out along the way. And then, of course, looking for funding. Next slide, that's always an issue. So I know this will be part of the conversation. So we just wanted to put this information in front of you around costs. So if you look here, we have the 3 programs, recreation preschool at the top, can serve up to 240 kids. We're going to pretty much run that the way we would normally run it. The registration is going to be normal. It's not a referral system. Typically, we get about 15% of those participants that need scholarship help, but I think that might increase just given the time we're in. If we applied scholarships to every single kid in the recreation preschool program, that would take $617,000, and that's at the 75% off rate. If you go to the far right column, if we just wanted to pay for it all, it'd be about $824,000. And so you can see as we go down in this chart, same thing for the full day, up to 348 kids at 75% off for everybody, $821,000. No cost to anybody, about 1.1 million. And then lastly, the after school program, serving up to 204 kids, 75% off for everybody. It's $144,000. If we want to make it free, it's a little over $190,000. It is worth noting we have about $600,000 in scholarship money still left in PRNS. We use scholarships throughout the years for a variety of programs. It makes a lot of sense to pour that money into this program, but just understand this program only gets us to December. And after December, we wouldn't have any more scholarship money if we used it all in this program, which means the second half of the fiscal year, we wouldn't have scholarships available for any kind of programming. So we do have to keep that into consideration, but we do feel, that, and potentially I know there's going to be some conversation about CRF funds and things like that. Here's basically what it would take to do it for free. So with that, we're done. Of course, we'll be here at the end with questions, but I think there's a little bit more of the presentation to go. Thanks, Lee.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Jill. I'm going to go back in the presentation, and Deputy Chief Randall will start it from the top. It's my understanding that her or Assistant Chief Knopf have emailed you all the info memo that was released, I believe, last Thursday, tied to this item, and apologize to the mayor and council that we did not make that more explicit, that there was an info memo to follow along with. Deputy Chief?
Okay, how's the sound? Working now?
It's great. It's great. Thanks.
Okay, and I apologize that you guys did not have that report as well. It probably was a little confusing, but we'll just quickly go over it now that you have it in front of you. Just go over the key points. Again, the considerations that we have here is that it is preliminary and small numbers can result in large percentage changes. But what we found from our analysis looking at that shelter in place timeframe, comparing 2019 to 2020, is that we saw an overall 2% decrease in those statistics. But I want to point out how we came to those numbers, because this was brought up to us and how we concluded the 2% decrease. On page 5 of the report, you will see the occurrence dates broken down by week, and they are also separated out by division and district. It's important to note that we took only reported incidents that occurred during shelter in place to include those in our overall percentage of that, that -2% decrease. We pulled out incidents that were reported during shelter in place, but occurred prior to. And so you'll find those in those first two columns. They're not significant numbers, but they can make slight changes in the overall percentages. But this is broken down and you can see any fluctuations during shelter in place and what we saw reported to us. Again, knowing that domestic violence is an underreported crime, and we always keep that in mind. We did look at incident location type. Where did this occur? Was it a residence? Was it a hotel, motel, public street? And we looked at that and broke that down as well for us to see really where we should be focusing our efforts. As we move ahead in the report on page 8, we looked at the most or the highest locations with the highest reported incidents. I want to mention that the highest reported incident was an address on Blossom Hill Road. What we found was that when we got the report, made contact with our family violence unit, they had already been working on this address and coordinating with advocates as well as our Department of Family and Children's Services. So we know that some of the systems we have in place do work. But again, noting that these are areas for potential outreach through our family violence unit and our crime prevention unit. We broke down the incident types. Those are on page 9. And you can see the different types of domestic incidents and the percentages of which they occurred during that shelter in place. The highest reported were the domestic violence restraining order violations, domestic battery. Those did see a decrease. What we did notice was an increase in other types of domestic related incidents, namely the criminal threats, vandalism, domestic rape, as well as domestic brandishing of a weapon. Now, those are things to take note of. We do have some theories of why those might have gone up. And one of those is the change that we made to our record management system. So we now have these specific crime types that officers, when they respond out to a call for service, can now enter that report specifically, noting that it's a domestic criminal threat or a domestic vandalism, where previously they might have used a more general crime type. And we also provided training to our patrol division and our field training officers so that they know how to navigate RMS and find those crime types, because we really want that timely and accurate information. And we break those down, the different crime types, on page 10, week to week, so we can look for any trends, and as well as the time that it was reported, time of day. Naturally, we expect more reports to come in when people are generally awake during the day and then evening hours. And we see that for both 2019 and 2020. We also analyze the day of the week, nothing that really stood out, but again, something to monitor and take note of. One of the things that I do want to quickly point out is on page 16, we looked at when an incident was reported in relation to when it occurred. And this is important because obviously we want people to call and report crimes right when they happen so that we can do a thorough investigation, and also, more importantly, is connect that survivor to services. And what we see is a slight increase in reporting the same day that it occurred and a slight increase within a week of occurrence. But we also see a dramatic decrease in incidents that occurred over a month or in the prior year. And that's a good trend, and we'll definitely monitor that. Again, this is just during shelter in place, and so we'll need to have more data to have a meaningful analysis if this is a consistent trend. And then we break those down week to week of when those those incidents are reported. Again, overall, we're seeing that decrease of 2%, keeping in mind that domestic violence incidents are underreported. But that is the report, and I will be taking questions if anybody has some.
We'll go back to you, Lee, first before we head to questions. Thank you very much, Chief.
Yep, and I think Andrew's going to close us out.
Okay, great.
Next slide, Lee, thanks. So just a quick preview for the council of what we plan to cover in future weeks. This could obviously change as events arise, but next week we'll come back to you with an update on the city's fiscal recovery, as well as a state legislation update from our intergovernmental relations team, and we'll provide an update on our digital inclusion work. And then the following week, September 1st, we'll talk about concurrent emergency planning, which obviously has already started given the events of this past week. Another update on our homelessness and Beautify SJ work. We'll talk more in depth, not only about the compliance orders and enforcement that you heard about today, but also our efforts on outreach and education. And you'll hear from our EPIO about our strategic communication plan. And I think that's it for today. Lee, I'll pass it back to you.
Yep, staff is ready for any questions, Mayor.